The member for Wills has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. How is the Albanese Labor government changing Australia's approach to engagement with Pacific nations on climate change, and what previous approaches are being changed?
The call to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wills for his question and his ongoing commitment to fighting climate change and his deep commitment to national security. Mr Speaker, nothing is more central to the security and wellbeing of the Pacific than taking action on climate change. And that's because the Pacific is bearing the brunt of climate change. In Australia, we've seen bushfires, droughts and the current massive floods. In Pacific Island countries, we're seeing inundation, water contamination and threats to food security. And that's why the 2018 Boe Declarations said that climate change remains the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security and wellbeing of the peoples of the Pacific. For example, Kiribatis' main island, Tarawa, will lose 50% of its land mass by 2100 under current projections. And at COP27, Australia's response was really well received. I met with 10 Pacific leaders and ministers, including the Prime Ministers of Cook Islands and Tonga and the President of Palau. And the Secretary-General of the PIF said Australia is taking a new, refreshed approach to its relationship with the Pacific, and it's reinforcing that not just with words, but also with some solid, real action. We're working with the Pacific to deliver outcomes that reflect Pacific interests. We supported Pacific climate negotiators to be there and to progress a bid for climate COP in the Pacific. And after a decade of inaction, Australia is taking action at home and abroad. We're supporting the Pacific Climate Facility. We're providing $900 million worth of extra ODA to the Pacific with a real focus on climate change. And I was also asked, Mr Speaker, how that approach has changed from the last government. Well, the Albanese government has delivered more in 6 months than the last government did in 10 years. For example, we're not making jokes about climate change destroying Pacific Island countries. We're taking this existential threat seriously. We're not blowing up regional security and unity like the member for Cook did by blocking action on climate change at the 2019 PIF.
The Minister will resume his seat, and I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker,
Minister for the Environment.
The Minister's answer offends against several provisions of the standing orders, but in particular on relevance, you have previously directed a minister back to the question when he strayed and got into the record of the previous government.
Will resume his seat, and I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Just to the point of order, in terms of the way the minister's answering this question, he's been quite specific about what the government's doing and what the government's not doing. Every part of it has been framed in terms of decisions being taken by the government and that he's taken as minister.
The question involved what is being changed. I'm going to ask the Minister to make sure he is comparing and contrast to those changes to be relevant and give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And in contrast to the last government, which blocked climate action, which led to Fiji Prime Minister Bainimarama saying that the former Prime Minister's actions were insulting, condescending and would drive the Pacific to countries other than Australia, the new government is supporting action on climate change, is supporting the Pacific. Because, Mr Speaker, the opposition likes to claim they're strong on national security, but being weak on climate, being weak on the Pacific, means they're weak on national security. And unfortunately, the opposition leader's attacks on climate action, his dog whistling on COP, in particular on damage and loss, demonstrates that the opposition leader doesn't understand national security, isn't fit to lead this party and is definitely not fit to lead this nation.